Hi, good to be with you today. We're glad that you watch these meditations, and as long as you keep watching, we'll keep putting them together. First, we wish you a happy Memorial Day. Enjoy your holiday. Do those things which you need to do to remember those who have gone before us. So in this season of Pentecost, not the season of Pentecost, this season of Easter, I'm getting ahead of myself here. This season of Easter, we have been talking about the surprising things that happened in the early church. And this week, in this story of Acts, is really not any different. It's a fun little story, but it's also a very surprising story. And we're in the 16th chapter of Acts, starting at the 16th verse. And in this story, Paul and Silas are in a particular town, and they're there to do what Paul does, which is to preach and to bring people into the church. And as they're in town and walking around town trying to find a place to pray, there's this slave girl who is possessed by a spirit. And she begins to follow them around, but not only does she follow them around, but she proclaims loudly, "Here are the slaves of the Most High God working for your salvation." Right? She follows them all over, and it's getting very annoying. And Paul finally turns around and rebukes the evil within her, and the evil is gone. And you'd think that that was a good thing. But it turns out it puts Paul and Silas in prison for this reason. The slave girl had owners, and they used her ability to tell people's futures to gain their money. Well, when the spirit left, her ability to tell the future left. Her ability to raise financial means for her owners also left, which did not make them happy. And so they went to the magistrates, they went to the local law enforcement officers and convinced them to jail Paul and Silas. And of course, even in our society, it's not enough to just put somebody in jail, or they were whipped and they were tortured. And they were put into chains and put into prison. And while they were in prison, all chained together, Paul and Silas and other people in the prison, all chained together, Paul does what Paul does. Paul began to preach, and they began to worship. They began to sing hymns. And in the midst of this worship service in prison, there was an earthquake that set all the chains free, and the prisoners were now free to go, but they went nowhere. The jailer, when he saw that all the people were no longer chained, he became fearful that he might end up being a prisoner himself for losing the prisoners, and he was about to kill himself when Paul stopped him. So the surprising thing in this story, and there's lots of surprising things, but the surprising thing in this story is that it makes me think about freedom. Who's free here? Who has the freedom to be who they need to be? Our assumptions would be that the owners of the slave girl are free, that the magistrates are free, that the jailer is free. Our assumptions would be that the slave girl is not. That Paul and Silas are chained and they're bound and they're in prison. But even though they're chained and bound, Paul and Silas and the other prisoners have a free spirit to take time to worship, to praise, to give thanks. And it seems to me that the owners are slaves themselves, that they're bound to financial gain by somebody else. And when that is no longer available to them, they have to change their life. The magistrate is chained and bound by the rules of Roman society. The jailer is bound and ruled by his superior. So it seems to me that Paul and Silas are the most free here, even though they're chained and bound. So that brings me to the question for our meditation. What or who determines your freedom? How bound are you to other things in life? How free are you to be whom God calls you to be? Our freedom, right, at least does not come from the country in which I live. Now, I am blessed to live here, but the freedom that I really want, the freedom that I truly enjoy, is the freedom that I get from my relationship with Jesus Christ. Because that's a freedom nobody can take away. Even with those who disagree with me, even those who don't like me, even nothing can take that freedom away. Okay? That's stuck. So again, what determines your freedom? And how free are you? Thanks for listening.